How can you make the right decision? It's often difficult to make a decision, especially if it's a big one. And making the right one is something that a lot of us probably have anxiety about. So in today's video, I plan to show you a step-by-step process on how you can make the right decision, how you can own that decision. With that being said, my name's Richardson. I'm a coach here at Life on Your Terms, and I really struggled in the past with analysis paralysis and making decisions for myself. I could never commit and own that decision. I would just sit and think about it for so long. So I promise you by the end of this video, you will understand how you can make the right decision and how you can own that decision. So the first step in the process in making the right decision is to evaluate or to stabilize. And when you evaluate or when you stabilize, I want you to have a little bit of a mindset shift that you're not trying to make the right decision, you're trying to make the best decision. Because hindsight's always 20/20. You may take action on a new job, a new relationship, a new workout, and you may look back and look at it and see, well, that wasn't the right decision. But I guarantee you it was the best decision at the time if you go through this process. So I want you to change your thinking on it. It's not about making the right decision, it's about making the best decision. And to make the best decision, I have 3 things I'm gonna share with you. But I don't want you to get caught up in thinking of the right decision, because that can cause a lot of, at least in my experience, some self-hatred if I made the wrong decision. So to make the best decision, what you're first gonna do is you're gonna ask yourself, what info do I need to make this decision and a sound decision? Also, does this info align with my values and my long-term versus short-term? So for a job, for example, short term, it may look really cool that you make 20 more grand a year, but long term, does it align with your values? Does it align with how you want your life to look? Stuff like that. And you need to ask yourself if it makes that alignment and what information you need to be able to understand that alignment and that information. Now, on top of that, another thing that you can do during the evaluation process is to ask yourself, is this in line with your goals? I would say value in life and long-term decisions, and then also, is this in line with your goals? So I like to think of my goals as my one thing. I have one thing I'm pursuing, and it's to help people take control of their situations and never be a victim of circumstance. And so everything I do in my coaching, in working with Life on Your Terms, everything is in line with that and streamlined through that one thing. So when you're making a decision, ask yourself, is this aligned with my one thing? And if you're struggling to find your one thing, I would encourage you to take the balance wheel in the description below, because this can really highlight what you want your one thing to be for this next quarter, or for this next year, or for the next 5 years. Because in the balance wheel, you look at your professional, your relationships, your health, and your resources, and from there, you can make some good decisions about it. On top of that, if you're trying to figure out what is in line with your one thing, I'd encourage you to ask yourself these 4 situations, which are, if I gave you $100 million, what would you spend? What would you do? If I told you that you had to be doing something you loved, but I pay you 200 grand a year for the rest of your life, what would you do? If the third thing is, if you had 3 years left in your life, what would you do at that time? And the fourth and final thing is, if you at your 100th year birthday, what was some of the legacy pieces you'd hear? Now, when you go through these 4 situations, you'll really be able to streamline and find your one thing, and I would encourage you to rank these and write these out as well. So that can be helpful. So first, you want to ask your values, long-term or short-term, what info do you need? On top of that, is it in line with your goals? Is it in line with your one thing, your life's mission? Now, on top of that, the third and final thing you could do while you're evaluating to make the best decision, not the right decision, is to actually make a pros and cons list. This has been very helpful for me. Actually just set out, make a pros and cons list. On top of the pros and cons list, you can ask for some different perspectives. I'd encourage you to ask your family, your friends, any mentors, ask what they think, talk through the situation with them, because what I found and why I love coaching is because it's not the coach themselves that is giving you the ideas. It's the questions that the coaches ask to pull those ideas out of you. So if you can just start talking with people, you'll see those ideas flow out of yourself that can make you find the best decision to make. Now, on top of different perspectives, research is always good. Do whatever research you need to get the information you need. So that's evaluation. Again, look at your values, your long-term and what information you need. Does this align with your one thing? And on top of that, gather different perspectives, make a pros and cons list, and this can help you make the best decision. So the second piece and the final piece is to simply make the decision and own it. Often in my past life, and I see a lot of people around me, they struggle to actually make the decision and commit to it. So this is a huge piece. Now, when you're making the decision, you may have some overthinking come up. And when you overthink, you'll sit in that analysis paralysis and you won't just commit. And that can lead to missed opportunities. If we look at cryptocurrency, if we look at almost any financial opportunity, the window is slim to make the decision. Same thing with some job roles. Those job roles are gonna get filled, so you can't just sit and think about it for so long. You can't just overthink, because if you overthink, that will lead to a decision being given to you and there's no choice, and that is not the best decision. So you want to try to avoid overthinking in this process, and the best way to avoid overthinking in this process, for me at least, has been to just commit. And when I commit, there's no overthinking and I just own the decision. Now, on top of committing, you want to try to avoid social pressure throughout the situation. We'll reference the example earlier where we talked about making that 20 grand could look cool in the short term, but maybe that's some social pressure that you're feeling for the status and the increase in finances. On top of social pressure, you want to try to avoid perfectionism. That could be some overthinking as well, is that you want to make the perfect decision. Well, the perfect decision doesn't necessarily usually exist, and on top of the perfectionism, that no decision is final. So if you truly think, oh, I need to make this perfect decision, well, there's no final outcome necessarily, and there's usually change other than a few obvious decisions that you'd make. Outside of that, no decision is final, so you don't have to worry about making that perfect decision. So that's gonna be the first piece. You maybe feel some overthinking, some social pressure, and some perfectionism, and you need to try to calm those thoughts. Now, the second piece that you need to move to when you're making this decision, I always encourage you to almost go with your gut. Your gut, you may do all this information, you may hear all of this perspectives from people, but you still don't feel like that's the best decision. And usually that gut intuition is typically in line with your one thing, so I'd encourage you to stick to that, because I think sticking to your one thing on a long enough time horizon, you will be happy with that decision, even if it comes at the cost of finances, relationships, whatever. If you stick to your one thing in an ethical manner, you will feel the best long term. Now, you don't want to just willy-nilly go with your gut and intuition. You want to pair it with evidence, but if you have evidence that this is in line with your one thing, but it's against what everybody else says, I would encourage you to go with that decision. Now, on top of going with your gut feeling intuition, I would encourage you, like I said, to just commit and take action. All of these things disappear. The overthinking, the social pressure, the perfectionism disappear when you make the decision. Yes, you may retrospectively look back and be like, oh, I could have done this or that, but you're not sitting in this no man's land where you don't have a decision, because you've committed and you've taken this action and you've owned it. And I would encourage you to truly own this and take responsibility for it, because I personally believe that every single decision and every single situation we are in our life is our fault. Not in a negative way. And I don't mean that everybody else's actions are your fault, so if you end up in this situation due to someone else's actions, but the way you react to it is your fault. So I believe wherever you're at right now, it's your fault. And that's, I think, a truly empowering concept, because then that gives you control to put yourself in any situation that you want to be. So I'd encourage you to own it. Whatever decision you make, it's your fault, and you own it, and walk with that. Walk with a sense of pride that, yeah, it's my fault, good or bad. So I would encourage you to commit, take action, and own it. Now, on top of that, if you feel like you made the wrong decision, if you feel like you regret what you did, you can go through these questions to help you kind of suppress that regret and get over it. So what you can ask yourself and tell yourself is, if you made a bad decision and it puts you in a worse position, it'll just add to your story. It'll make a better story. So for me, I made a few bad decisions when I was about 17. I ended up in the hospital. And I mean, a mental health hospital. But now I look back on it, and it has made my story so much better. And I go back to that moment so often, and it's just made my story better. Even though I made bad decisions before it, I have a better story as a result. Same thing if you put yourself in a bad financial position. Imagine the story you'll tell 10 years from now, getting out of that financial position. On top of a better story, you can ask yourself, will this matter in 5 years? Will this matter in 500 years? Because after we die, no one thinks about us. So other than about 10 people. So if you could ask yourself, will it matter in 5 years? That can be a really good way to get over what you're feeling. And if you want to go more extreme, 500 years, then you can think about, no one's going to think about when you're dead, so it doesn't matter anyways. Now, on top of that, on top of the better story, and will it matter in X amount of years, another thing you could tell yourself, Or ask yourself, is there really anything you can do? There's nothing you can do now. After you've made the decision, after you've committed, after you've owned it, there's nothing you can do after. So there's no reason spending energy looking at what you could have done other for the sake of improvement. And you, of course, go through that, but a prolonged amount of time of worrying about what you could have done better. And another great thing that I learned recently is to simply laugh at yourself. There's been decisions I've made in social situations, whatever. I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I do that? And it's not a big deal. Just don't take yourself seriously, laugh at yourself a little bit, and have fun with it. So that's what you're gonna do. You wanna make the decision and own it. You wanna avoid overthinking. You wanna avoid the social pressure. You wanna avoid the perfectionism. And you can do this by relying on your gut feeling, your intuition, and your one thing. And on top of the gut feeling, intuition, and your one thing, you wanna just commit and own that and take responsibility because it's your fault. And if you feel like you made a bad decision, you can just look back and ask yourself those questions. So right now, if you haven't, take that balance wheel in the description below because you can start making the right decision or the best decision within your life. On top of that, if you like this video, please comment because then I know to make more of these videos, make less of these videos, whatever. And if you'll like and subscribe, that's kind of the icing on the cake.